Chapter 6, Spring's Heart. Spring's Heart. The last day of Tarsuk was drawing to a close, the hazy sky the swirled color of buttermilk over the forest, the star spires looming above the northern canopy, brown against that pale yellow and marking the, now very nearby, boundary of the Wealdith. They would reach their destination on the morrow, and Fritha was very aware that, depending on what occurred at the temple ruins, their small group could be split once more, the elves returning to their city while she and Solafane were left to decide their next step. The verdant peace of Suldanesseller was 5 days and another world away. They travelled with soldiers now and were expected to live so, every morning begun with the bow exercise of which Valigar was so fond and sword drills. Fritha was always paired with Solafane and always on the losing side. Something he was clearly worried was disheartening for her, the drow assuring her he had seen her fight better than such paired practices allowed, and drills meant little in the bloodthirsty chaos of true battle. Then would come the long day of walking. Most of the elves spent it in quiet talk amongst themselves. Ferdinand's obvious disapproval was enough to keep the majority at bay, but the bolder of their company seemed more willing to make friends, the wood elf Tandeth and old Avalar, the pathfinder of Rilafane, their usual visitors, young Bryn and the couple from Evereska, sometimes dropping back as well to join she and Solafane as they brought up the rear together. Of course, there were others who were just as set upon their dislike, the brothers, Cephas and Orval, being the most obvious and willfully so. Solafane had kept his patience with their comments so far, and she had to keep reminding herself that, though the drow's anger at this treatment was evident, after a lifetime of training, their petty jibes were unlikely to breach his iron self-control. Fritha accepted her musings with a mental shrug and went back to her washing, rubbing the cloth over the back of her neck where the sweat and dust always seemed to mix to an oily grime above her chain mail. Shy, young Bryn had told her of the pool on his return from fetching the evening's water, face pink under his sandy crop of hair, as he had confessed he had heard her speaking to Solafane about wanting a wash the day before. It was a small glade, the narrow stream snaking through the trees from the north, its source likely high in the mountains there. The pool itself had been eroded out from the deep earth bowl left by a fallen tree, a few others looking as though they may soon be joining it, their gnarled roots twisting out across the pool as it stole the earth from under them, before chattering off on its way once more, and Fritha wondered if it eventually joined the river that fed the great lake as mill of trade meat. She had done her laundry when she had first arrived. What was now her entire wardrobe hung about her over bushes and lower branches, as though some group of people had wildly flung off all their clothes, a desperate hurry to be naked. She certainly had been, the girl wearing not a stitch now, stooped over the small pan of water and kept warm by her activity as she vigorously rubbed a well-soaped cloth over her skin. Her wash finally done, she rinsed the cloth, laying it on the grass to dry and throwing the dirty water to soak into the forest floor, at last ready for the moment she had been anticipating since she came upon that inviting, azure pool. The water was cold, a pleasant shiver bristling her skin as she waded to the center. It was not deep, the level just above her waist, the girl drawing a stealing breath to dunk herself under and gasping as she finally surfaced to settle on her knees, the sandy bed smooth beneath her legs and water rushing about her shoulders, Fritha leaning back, letting it ripple through her hair as it flowed its course. A rustle of undergrowth, Fritha straightening in time to see Solafane step from the trees, his pack over his shoulder and likely drawn there by the same reason as she. The instant he saw her, he had turned smartly on his heel, his voice, even though the tension to his shoulders betrayed his discomfort, Fritha watching the gather of long white hair sway slightly as he spoke.
"Your pardon, Fritha, I had not." "Don't worry, Solafane, I'll be out in a moment. Wait, if you want." "Well,
She smiled slightly.
"Are the drow usually so uncomfortable with nudity?" "No. And I'm hardly fussed anymore, so why pretend we're bothered when we're not? Besides, I doubt you could see much even if you looked.
The man seemed to consider this a moment, before taking a few steps to place his belongings down in the long grass opposite and settle next to them, his gaze lingering anywhere but the pool, as it should be. Frithla leaned back again with a contented sigh.
The water is pleasing. Yes, very. I don't like not being able to wash regularly. I cleaned my clothes too, see?
She offered, nodding to the nearest tunic.
Leave yours and I can do them for you, as well, if you like. I thank you, but I will wash my own. Stooping to slave's work,
she teased. He nodded once, eyes still watching her drying tunic.
Rather I than you. Were this a drow company, were you Stilvildren, such things as clean clothes and hot baths would be the least of the luxuries afforded to you by your slave retinue. Now, I am not one to advocate the use of slaves, but that does sound very nice. It would be worth it just to see the look on Ferdinand's face.
Her laughter was lost in the roar of water as she stood once more, wading back to the bank to where her traveling cloak and pack were waiting, the girl wrapping herself in the towel there and settling on the soft, silk-lined robe, as, behind her, Solophane's gasp indicated he had braved the water. He had already waded in up to his waist, his bared chest nothing she had not seen before, and she watched him begin his wash, the man scooping something from a jar on the opposite bank, though it did not foam like soap, the consistency against his glistening shoulders looking more gritty, and she wondered if it was some stronger version of the walnut and cherry oil scrub used on her face.
Ferdinand,
the drow sneered with an obvious odium as he continued their talk.
I understand his dislike of me, but why you?
Frithla shrugged, reclining back on her robe to gaze up at the distant canopy.
Ballspawn? Half-elf? Too short? Too pale? Too ginger? If people don't want to like you, they will always find a reason. You do not sound particularly troubled by his intolerance.
Frithla snorted a frank laugh.
I'm not. The problem is his, not mine. But does it still bother you so? In part. I was a man of rank in Ustnatha, head of the city's fighting males, and I take pride in my skills, even if they were employed less nobly than I would have liked. But now,
Solophane sighed, disconsolate and frustrated.
I am no one, just another drow murderer. And I know few others here on the surface will see me differently.
He glanced to her.
I wonder sometimes why you did.
She shrugged again, not sure she had an answer for him.
I suppose I have always just judged people as I find them. I never faced this before I left Candlekeep, this prejudice the rest of the Faerun seems to learn from the crib. I never realized the world was so segregated. My world was made of many creeds, sages from the length and breadth of Faerun, humans, elves, dwarves from the Dalens to Kalimshan, and some of the visitors came from even further away. But in Candlekeep, it didn't matter who or even what you were, all were judged on their minds, unfortunately for me.
She added with a wry laugh.
But things will change for you, Solophane, and if they do not, do the opinions of such bigots really matter? And what of you?
He questioned gravely.
I note I do not face this prejudice alone. It is hardly the same, most people don't know I'm a ballspawn. And of those that do,
she considered aloud,
well, they usually either want to kill me or are scared of me, or both, but some see past that to person I am. As Elsyme did,
he offered quietly. Frithla sighed.
Well, yes, there is that. But it is hard to feel wronged in something when you can see where the one responsible is coming from.
Solophane nodded, stooping slightly to splash water across his torso.
I understand your dilemma. Though Ferdinand and the others' attitudes anger me, I wonder sometimes if it is as much as I deserve. I have lived a long while and have committed many atrocities in the maintenance of my act, something made worse by the fact I knew I did not agree with them, but could see no other way. Perhaps, their distrust is justified.
Frithia smiled, eyes back on the golden sky.
Perhaps. But we must all play the hand we're dealt. Many grow up free and choose paths much worse than the one you were forced to walk. And, God's willing, you've many years left to redress the balance.
A pause to the splashing, Frithia glancing back to find him watching her once more, pale eyes alive in the fading light.
You have a beautiful soul, Frithia.
Frithia laughed.
Beautiful or not, I'm just glad to have it back.
Solafane shook his head, smiling as he returned to his washing, Frithia closing her eyes to better enjoy the chatter of the stream and gathering birds both, as they settled into their roosts, and the next thing she saw was the drow standing over her, dressed now and framed by the twilit canopy, the rest of his clothes hung about the glade with her own.
Solafane! You fell asleep?
She nodded, still trying to wake up, and he waited while she discarded her towel, finally pulling on her slip and pale blue traveling cloak, her feet in her battered leather sandals as they set off.
The night draws in,
offered Solafane to the gloaming,
the others may already have retired.
Frithia suppressed a shiver, drawing her robe about her.
I hope they have not all decided to take reverie outside again like last night. It's like you get up in the morning and they're all dead.
But, back at camp, it seemed none there were sleeping, even if they had wished to be, half the elves still up and caught in a heated discussion of the symbiotic relationship between nature and elfkin, the lights of what was likely a village in the distant foothills, just visible through the trees, hanging in the darkness like a tiny swarm of fireflies.
Elves are born of nature,
offered Vestal, red hair bright in the firelight.
Their relationship comes as instinctive.
Cephas was frowning.
But what of those elves who would live within the human cities? Some have clearly lost such an affinity. Perhaps,
conceded Fernil,
but return them to the fold and they will soon relearn our ways. It is so,
nodded Orville,
but I believe the elves should take a more active role in enforcing a similar relationship between nature and the other races. Faerun is for everyone,
reminded Vestal.
We cannot dictate how the other races should live.
Cephas gave a sanctimonious snort.
The other races I will concede, but the humans are too young and greedy as a people, all the races agree it. Their lives are too short to care for the consequences of their actions. I agree,
said Fernil firmly, as though daring any to contest him.
The humans are blight upon Faerun. They would destroy nature for their own profit, damning even the future of their own people, as well as the other races. Why, even here on the edge of the Wildeth, we have seen recent evidence of careless felling by their kind.
He finished the rant with a glare to the two newcomers.
I don't know why he's looking at us, Solafane,
said Frithia in a clear, orotund voice, the drow smiling as she turned to their tent.
Good night everyone.
Imoen lay still, staring up at the dark canvas roof of the tent as Jahara slept next to her, the rustle of the swaying branches and distant creaks and groans of the forest echoing just beyond those fabric walls. They had tried to get a boat from Trademeet, but none were heading southwards and they had had to make the way by foot in the end, 5 days of hard travel finding them under the Wildeth's canopy once more. She listened to the forest about her, fingers playing absently with the blue stone pendant at her neck, her eyes hot and sandy even as they refused to close and sleep. She knew the others did not understand her urgency. Indeed, she did not understand it herself, only that ever since Valigar had mentioned the troubles in Tethur, there had been a knot in her stomach, heavy enough to leave her sick, and she knew the feeling would not leave her until she saw Frithia's face once more and knew she was, as the others kept insisting, perfectly well. Imoen sighed deeply, trying not to fidget. Her worries for Fritha were only half her troubles. Ever since she had left Diarna's keep, the dreams had begun once more, their respite lasting only slightly longer than her stay in Suldanessellar. They were bad, too, but different to the ones she suffered from before, where every night would find her back in Irenicus's care, mind swimming with the horrors he had shown her. Now, the dreams were more abstract, not as such frightening, but they disturbed her enough to make for restless nights. Imoen let her mind drift back to the one that had just awoken her, a city aflame and people screaming as a tide of blood engulfed them. It was no good, there was no way she was getting back to sleep now. Outside, the embers of a small fire were glowing in the firepit, like a clutch of salamander eggs. Moths and other insects engaged in an elaborate dance above, while Valigar sat within the small circle of light, his broad face set as he stared out into the night.
"I thought Minsk had this shift,"
she murmured, throwing down her cloak and herself after it.
"I sent him back to his tent, I could not sleep." "I don't suppose you're tired now?"
she snorted at his frown.
"No, me either." "You are worried for Fritha?"
Imoen nodded, prompting his sigh.
"Nothing will have happened, you know." "Will you stop saying that? Something is wrong, don't ask me to explain, I just know it." "Fine," he rejoined tersely, "but we will be there soon enough, and until then perhaps you should try to put it from your mind, you will only make yourself ill." "Yeah, you're right,"
she sighed, his concern making her feel suddenly all the worse.
"I'm sorry I keep snapping. So what's your excuse for being out of bed, then?"
Valigar shrugged, poking at the glowing embers to send sparks rising up into the darkness.
"When back in the city I was reacquainted with an old friend of my parents and my former tutor. He stayed at my home a time, though our parting was less than cordial, and in the exchange, he spoke of my mother. I have been thinking upon that."
Imoen was very careful in her phrasing.
"On what you did to her?" "In a way. I do not like to think on my past, my childhood especially, but I have found myself dwelling on it more and more of late, and I am remembering things, moments between my mother and my younger self, ones of kindness and the love I had assumed absent in my upbringing. I was happy." "Then, what happened?"
"As I grew older, I learnt more of our family's heritage. Our vow concerning Lavik and our lost wealth were but two of generations of follies, and I saw that our affinity with the art was the cause of it all. I felt at the time that my mother was growing more distant as my dissatisfaction grew, but I wonder now if that was not me pushing her away. It all came to a head when my uncle was arrested for dealing in necromantic supplies. Such a business is frowned upon in Waterdeep, and it was only with a great deal of coin and influence that he was spared the jail. I accused my mother of heading down the same path, that she would eventually be corrupted by the magic, and how I would not stay there to watch it. And, good to my word, I departed and, if Allergard is to be believed, left a void in my mother's life that only the art could fill. I sealed her fall." His last word died in the air, Imoen with little to offer the silence, and they sat like that a while, the frustration building in her heart until... "What do you want from life, Valigar?" she burst out suddenly. "You returned to Athkatla to run your estate, why, when you never cared before? Is it guilt over this, over your mother's death?" "In a way, though it comes more from my decision as the last of the Korthala line to end our cursed heritage for good. I thought to give my ancestors renown instead of an heir." Imoen was stunned. "No heir?" She laughed weakly. "Gods, you're really going to do the thing properly, aren't you? I certainly hope you are the last Korthala then. What a waste it would be if there was some distant relative still kicking about with name and curse both. I believe the risk of such is slim enough to chance, but what of you,
what are your plans?
She dismissed his question with a wave of her hand.
I can't plan ahead, I never could. We'll get back to Sultanaselar, everything will be well.
She added pointedly for his benefit.
Then we can all go back to Athkatla together and everyone can move forward. We can only move forward, Valigar.
She pressed quietly, but the man avoided her eye and she could not tell whether he had heeded her or not. She let her gaze fall from his face to notice the map had been studying.
So, how many days now before we get there? Another one and a little into the next at this pace.
Are you having trouble keeping up, Vals? She teased. The man snorted, going back to his map, and Imoen lay down there upon her cloak, letting her eyes close at last. The first day of Myrtle had dawned an inauspicious grey, the sky dull and overcast, though Inomen doubted a blizzard would have dampened his friend's good spirits. He was in the squire's dormitories now, seated on the spare bed William would have usually occupied, were he not away with his knight, Eric next to him, while the other 3 beds served as chairs for their usual occupants. Aidan, Satyr and Simon were all up with the larks and chattering just as merrily as they completed their night's chores, Satyr cleaning Sir Gethin's boots and Aidan running an oiled rag over a pair of leather bracers, while Simon burnished a large ornate breastplate to a mirror-like shine.
Only a few short hours now, Simon,
laughed the swarthy Satyr.
Then comes your judgment. Are you nervous?
Asked Aidan, running an anxious hand through his floppy brown hair.
I'd be nervous.
The summons had come 2 days ago. The order requested to marshal their forces and march into Tether to meet with Knights of the Silver Chalice that they may together rout this group of giants and brigands who were bringing trouble to that land. A company of 100 knights and their squires left on the morrow, but for Simon a trial of a different sort was yet to be faced, not that the man himself was regarding it as such, Simon characteristically unruffled by the look of things, the man admiring his own beaming reflection in the breastplate before setting it aside to work on the back.
What is there to fret about? What will come, and I know the least of what is come will be a party. My parents are holding a gathering at the estate tonight. I expect to see you all there, and the lovely Bridget too, Aidan.
Truly. The lad grinned, already looking forward to it, it seemed.
She will be pleased. I'd best let her know now then, she will have to ask her father's permission.
And off he went, no doubt to find one of the younger boys to deliver the message, leaving a frowning Eric in his wake.
A gathering? Do you not think that is a little premature, Simon? You may not yet be knighted.
Eric! Cried Inomen. He could not even imagine how awful he would have felt if anyone had said the same to him before his judgment. But Simon just laughed.
Well, if it comes to that, then I shall definitely be wanting a drink.
Satyr was grinning, already on his second boot.
The gatherings at your estate are always the best, Simon. Your sisters are going to be there, aren't they? Yes, and my brother, Gerard, too, with Fariha, Adris and new baby Riyama. My mother has been smiling for the last 10 days, she always loves to have the house full.
Inomen smiled, too, leaving them to their talk of families and the gathering to come, the man moving downstairs to the entrance hall, the clatter of those last few who had lingered over breakfast echoing from the refectory. It was not there he turned though, the man heading straight to the door out onto the courtyard, his hand reached out for the handle when it swung back of its own accord, Brianna suddenly in the mouth, both hair and tunic free from the sprigs of flowers many ladies wore on that day.
Lady Brianna! Hello, Inomen, a fair green grass to you.
He moved to the side, the woman inadvertently mirroring his movement and they shifting back and forth for an awkward moment, each trying to get out of the other's way, a gnome finally taking a wide step back into the entrance hall and fighting against a blush.
"Forgive me, my lady. It is quite all right,"
she smiled, entering at last.
"That was the first dance I've had since the wedding."
A gnome joined her in a laugh.
"You seem in good spirits. I see Simon is not the only one who has no worries about the outcome of their judgment. I fear I was a bundle of nerves. And I have no doubt I would be the same, but I will not be joining the other squires in the ceremonies this day. I spoke to the prelate this morning and we agreed I could defer my judgment until midsummer."
A gnome could barely believe what he had just heard.
"You asked to defer to the summer ceremonies?"
Brianna nodded gravely.
"Yes, I wish to prove my mettle now I am within the order's ranks. I know there is a battalion leaving for Tether on the morrow and I have asked to be counted in their company. I feel it must be done, for the honor of Torm and, indeed, my own heart."
A gnome really could not think of anything to answer such humility, though he was saved the effort.
"Ah, Lady Brianna,"
called Simon, the pair turning to see he and Satyr clattering blithely down the stairs behind them.
"Fair Greengrass, my lady. Has a gnome here told you of the party to be held at my estate? It is from the sunset, and you are most welcome to attend."
Brianna smiled, a light-hearted spark suddenly resting in those brown eyes.
"Why, thank you, Sir Simon. I'm afraid it is still squire as yet,"
the man admitted with a grin.
"Of course, but I thought it best to practice it a little."
Simon laughed loudly.
"Careful, my lady, you'll swell my head." "I wouldn't worry, Simon, it surely couldn't get much bigger,"
offered Satyr. The blond man laughed affectedly, throwing an arm about his friend's shoulders and cuffing the back of his head, the pair of them still bickering blithely as they stepped through the doors.
"You had best hope I don't get knighted, you'll be on stable duties for a 10-day. "And what threat is that? I've had to share a room with you for 5 years. "Well,"
said Brianna, still smiling as she turned back to him,
"I will no doubt see you tonight then." "Yes, my lady, until then."
He bowed to her nod, and his eyes followed her until the refectory doors were closed once more. Fritha ducked into the tent, dropping instantly to her knees in amongst the soft blankets, the man she shared with still asleep beneath his own, white hair escaping from its tie to lay across his polished, black shoulders, his handsome face still tense even in sleep.
"Cellophane,"
she murmured, slowly extending the ash branch she held, fresh green leaves drooping under their weight of dew.
"Cellophane."
The branch was right above his face now, the girl feeling a smile pulling at her mouth as she gave it a good shake and dislodged its shower, the man spluttering as he sat bolt upright.
"Nilith Spar, Fritha,"
he choked, finally finding her, the girl instantly pressing the branch into his hand with a joyous laugh.
"Fair greengrass to you, Cellophane." "Ah, and a fair greengrass to you,"
he answered, after a long pause, the man frowning slightly as he asked,
"Fritha, what is greengrass?" "It is the first day of Myrtle, a celebration of the spring that is well in down here and has not yet even touched the northern lands. But it does not matter, I'll celebrate the day."
He gave the branch he held an illustrative shake.
"By attacking people with leaves. It's lucky to wash your face in dew, they say you will keep spring's youthful glow all year." "And has it worked?" "Perhaps not on your hair,"
she smiled, the girl laughing lightly as he reached a tentative hand up to check the rumpled mess of snowy tresses.
"I collected our clothes from the glade, they've all dried, thankfully. Here, I've put yours next to your bag.
And Frithla left him to dress, moving outside to welcome the dawn with a song of larks and blossoms as she moved about the camp's edge, collecting wood enough to rekindle a flame from the cinders of their fire pit, the elves slipping from the tents or stirring from their reverie to join her in work.
You seem in fine spirits this morning, child,
offered Avalur with a smile, the man handing a pot to Bryn for the morning's water.
Fair green grass to you, Avalur, and to you, Bryn,
she called after the youth, the boy waving his acknowledgement.
Ah, green grass, is it?
Confirmed Tandith, as he brought out the flat-seeded bread and sweet cheeses that would be their first meal.
The celebration of spring, good, good, for there is much in the season to celebrate.
But not all were in agreement with him. Orville barked a condescending laugh.
Really, the pointless way the humans find to mark out the year, they are exulting in nature one day and raping its bounty the very next.
Frithla smiled sweetly.
And a fair green grass to you, Orville, I wish you every joy.
The man snorted, stooping to mutter something at Sephisa's ear, and the two laughed unpleasantly. Frithla ignored them. The fire before her was dancing merrily, and now she was satisfied it would not return to a smouldering stack of wood once her back was turned. She began rummaging through her pack for the tea. Jestrin and Vestal were busy toasting the batches of flat bread, Solifane stepping from their tent, Branch now tucked in his belt, the drow moving to help the just arriving Bryn with the water, and the tea was soon steeped to an appetizing red, Vaisala ladling out the cups as Captain Fernil stepped from his tent, the man surveying their industry with an air of satisfaction.
We are all here,
he confirmed with a glance over the camp.
Good. Listen then to my orders. The temple ruins lie a few leagues from here to the west on the very edge of the Wealdith. We will therefore keep camp here and the group will be split. Myself, Cephis, Orville, Vaisala and Jestrin will head to the temple with our guests. It will be easier to approach unseen in smaller numbers and we must exercise caution, some of those who trespass there may be still about. The rest of you will hold here and await our return. Understood?
A prompt chorus of understood. Breakfast a much more subdued affair as Fernil joined their circle, the group eating in near silence, and Frithla was quite glad as, one by one, those who were leaving dusted off their plates and made to pack up. Solifane drawing the ash branch from his belt to snap off a sprig for his hat. Cephis snorted his contempt.
That the humans indulge in such foolishness is pathetic enough, but that you would bother, as well. Tell me, drow, what spring is there to celebrate in the Underdark?
Solifane sent him a cold look and Frithla edged a step closer, ready to step in if needed.
We have our own seasons there as anywhere, elf, just because you know nothing of the world outside your own forest. Perhaps when you are older, you will be allowed to see more of it.
Cephis flushed.
I have seen more than you, drow. You likely know a little more of your own city than the tiles at your feet.
Solifane said nothing, pointedly snapping off another sprig to place it carefully behind Fritha's ear, the girl quickly moving it to a more secure position entwined about one of her wooden hairpins as they set out. It was a few hours' walk to the ruins along the southern edge of the Wealdith, and long enough for Solifane to calm down. The first hour of the journey walked in silence, Fritha at his side in unspoken comradeship as they brought up the back. The captain had changed course slightly now, their bearing more southwest as they slowly left the forest. About them, the trees were thinning, falling away as the ground became stonier. Even the green of the leaves seemed to take on a yellow tinge there, in that sepia-stained landscape of brown mountains and dusty earth, as though too much sun had leached its color into land. And there was the temple, just a shell now of a once grand building, the great copper dome missing half its panels, rotting shutters hanging at the dark windows. The building was set on the tree line of the Wealdith, its back within the trees to hide its sprawling size, while the front stood in the shadow of those sharp-spired mountains, a clear plain of dry grass, gorse, and sagebrush leading up to the broken pillars of the doorway, a great stone skull carved above and judging all who would enter.
"There,"
hissed Fernil, as though this confirmed everything,
"the temple of your kind."
The place was silent, more tomb than temple. Frith's nostrils twitched, assaulted by the scent of charred wood and damp as they stepped into the gloom of the entrance chamber, fungi growing on rotting beams above, while at their feet, ryegrass poked from between the once polished stone tiles wherever there was light, both walls and floor the same brown stone of the nearby mountains.
"Be careful,"
offered Jestrin in a whisper.
"The others could have left traps for any that follow."
Fernil nodded grimly.
"Split into pairs, I want the place searched."
Fritha led the way, Solafane but a pace behind her as they took the rightmost corridor to find themselves in the main hall. Here, the stone tiles could barely be seen for plants. The ceiling was completely gone and one of the walls collapsed as well, the three that were left blackened by smoke, the only thing not touched by any of it, the great stone altar that was set at the end. It was not the same dull brown stone as the rest of the temple, but a glossy dark grey, brought from far away upon devoted backs, each face carved with scenes of demons and skulls and tiny figures bent in either pain or worship.
"No, no, let me go, filthy forest walker. Let me be."
A glanced to Solafane, and the pair were running back through to the entrance chamber, the walls echoing with shouts, and Solafane had the lead as they barreled into what had once been the kitchens. The elves gathered on the edge. Fernil stood in the center with his sword drawn, a hand clamped about her bony arm as an old woman struggled and cursed at him, her black ragged robes hanging loose on her thin form, face tanned like leather and twisted with anger under a wiry nest of iron-gray hair, her free hands swinging wildly as she tried to claw at him with long curved nails. Half the roof was missing and a myriad of pots had been set beneath to collect the rainwater, one knocked over and smashed in the scuffle, the water it had held lost to the parched stone tiles.
"Unhand me, blighted one! Tell us, human, tell us of the men who came here." "Hey, leave her alone!"
Fritha snapped, barging through the gathering of onlookers, Fernil breaking his hold at merely the thread of behind touched by her, the old woman instantly scuttling back to cower amid the brimming pots, Fritha's eyes catching on the glint of gold swinging in amongst the rags she wore, a leering golden skull, one of its ruby eyes long missing. The woman could have likely sold such for enough coin to live her remaining years in comfort, and yet there it hung still, above her heart in that ruined temple. Fritha sighed, her voice gentle, devotion was devotion, after all.
"You were a priestess here, weren't you? What happened to this place?" "People came," she spat, "all with the reek of the noble faiths upon them, came with blades and magic, came to stop our work." "What work?"
snapped Fernil. The priestess sent him a poisonous glare, but answered all the same.
"This place, blessed by Baal, once and many times over. In our wombs we carried those blessings, those that would restore him." "The children of Baal,"
murmured Vaisala, kissing the golden oak leaf hung at her neck to avert the evil of it. The priestess nodded, watery eyes glazing over and rapturous smile gracing her wizened face as she lost herself to the memories.
"The time had come for the first of the sacrifices. We, the faithful, had gathered in the temple, those chosen vessels ready and lined before the altar. The high priestess entered in her robes of shining scarlet, her little daughter following so solemn behind, bearing the bone knife that would perform the deed. Not 5 summers to her name, and already the image of her mother, a little doll in blood-red robes, a frown of concentration on her face as she made sure not to trip. Oh, she was daughter of us all. We are not here for your foul reminiscences, hag!"
snapped Cephas, Fritha just stopping herself from striking his shoulder.
"Shush! And then? What happened then?"
The woman's lined face creased with a sneer.
Then they came. The high priestess would not be halted though, the work had to go on. Even as we fought, she began the sacrifices, the altar slick with blood. There was fire everywhere, women screaming, cut down as they fled, the blessed vessels crying out and running as they could. I sank back with my own, and watched as some foul mage of light killed high priestess, engulfed her in fire and stole her poor, precious child. She was killing children!
Shouted Jestrin. Fritha sent him a quelling look.
And what of the others that came here more recently?
The priestess gave an ugly laugh, suddenly gleeful.
Oh, yes, the men that came, men who had studied the old prophecies, thought themselves so wise. Looking for the root of the power, as the old texts had described, the power our Lord Baal planted here so long ago. But they did not understand, it was taken in a time long past now. How they raged about the temple searching for it, but to no avail. And who were they?
Asked Fernil.
These men that came.
The woman shrugged indifferently.
Just men, seeking gold and rank in the wake of one more far powerful than they. He thinks himself like my lord, but his is a stolen power.
She laughed again, pale eyes shining with spite.
Sister Niali thought herself so clever, slipped from our sisterhood and stole a child of her own to raise. But her boy turned on her. Not like mine, I spilled its blood on the altar, just as my lord intended. Where were these men from?
Pressed Fritha.
Do you know? Ah, they came from here, far south across the mountains. The star spires?
Asked Orville. The woman shook her bushy head.
No, no, too cold for them. Look to the fires that burn within. Fires within?
Repeated Jestrin.
Could she mean the marching mountains? They are the only active volcanoes I know of within Tethur. And they are within this land only barely,
added his wife.
They form the boundary between here and Kalimshan, far to the south.
Fritha nodded, crouching to the woman's level and letting a hand hover over the broken shards next to her, the pot reforming at her glance.
We thank you, priestess.
But the woman barely seemed to hear her words, her pale, watery eyes suddenly wide as she stared back at her.
Oh, it's you. Oh, I see those eyes, you always had such pretty dark eyes. Ha!
A flash of curved nails, Fritha's hand clamped to her wet cheek as she stumbled back, the air filled with shouts and a manic laughter that was soon lost to curses, Solophane's fist in that briar of hair as he hauled the woman furiously back, long sword ready in the other.
Leave her,
gasped Fritha, Vezela's arms under her own as she helped her to her feet.
We have what we came for.
The drow released her with a sulky look, muttering something in his own tongue as he spat at the priestess's feet, his displeasure matched by the captain's as Fritha stooped to her bag and set 2 days' worth of rations on the tiles.
I'll get replacements.
Outside once more, the sun was high, the elves gathering in a discourse of their own, and Fritha moved a few paces from them. The scent of the sun-warmed sage was hanging in the air and she could almost feel the brush pulling at her clothes, the dusty ground hot and smooth beneath her bare feet, and far away, someone was calling her name.
Fritha!
She started, Solophane sending her a concerned frown as she whirled to face him.
Are you well, Fritha? Yes, I just felt strange for a moment.
His frown deepened as he threw a glance back to the charred husk of the temple.
This place reeks of death, I will be glad to leave it. Your face. It's nothing, just a graze, she dismissed quickly, smiling as she noticed again the small sprig of ash leaves secured to his hat. Come on, let's get back to the camp.
End of chapter.